Douglas, what do you mean by the term far right?
Well, I mean, and I think everyone used to mean a fascist, a Nazi, neo-Nazi, somebody who, for instance, didn't really believe in the democratic process, didn't mind the use of political violence or violence to achieve political ends, and a whole set of really nasty, ugly opinions behind that. Racism, all sorts of extremism. And I think most of us sort of knew what it meant. It was somewhere in that territory. Now, I think it is used very largely, as I said in this piece, by people for partisan political ends to smear and defame many people who I think should not be given the term. And the problem is, I think, that it is polluting our political discussion, and it's particularly polluting it across Europe, where it's not just that politics is on the march and the move, but the publics are clearly on the move. And that in such a situation, it's very dangerous simply to call everything you don't like far-right, because if you do call everything you don't like far-right, you end up, strangely, allowing the far right in.
David, what do you see the term far
Well,
right
I agree with most of that, and I've heard far too many people just in the last few days describing the Front National, for example, as far right, as fascist. Actually, we had Dominique Moisy doing it at the Spectator event. I heard Bernard-Henri Lévy doing it at a Henry Jackson Society event. I heard on Newsnight last night Yanis Varoufakis calling the Front National fascist. And as Douglas says, this is far too easy. It means that a whole section of the left and the centre-left, liberal Europe, stops addressing the issues that these parties are winning a lot of support on. We simply do not acknowledge the extent to which some of these parties have changed their spots. And we were very asymmetrical on this. We're very happy to, how many was it? 4 or 5 people who sat in Tony Blair's first cabinet were former Trotskyists. We're happy to allow people to come in from the extremist cold on the left. We've historically tended to be much more reluctant to do it to people on the far right. They're moving, but it's only an apparent move. They retain their deeply embedded commitment to racism or anti-Semitism or whatever it is. Some people will be doing that. They will be disguising it. But I think we have to acknowledge that other people genuinely change.
Douglas, why do you think the term far left is less toxic than the term far right?
Gosh, it's an interesting question. A historical anomaly, apart from anything else. But if you want to regard how strong that anomaly remains, I mean, you consider that on May Day this year, the Shadow Chancellor, John MacDonnell, gives a speech in Trafalgar Square in front of banners with Stalin on them. I mean, the idea that Philip Hammond would ever speak at a rally in Trafalgar Square in front of banners of Goering or Goebbels, I mean, it's unimaginable. It may just be that the left has been more tolerant of people going on the move politically, but it must matter a bit. I mentioned in the piece another example, the difference between, for instance, a party that is openly racist. I'm thinking of Jobbik in Hungary or the Golden Dawn in Greece, and a party which is not racist but may, for instance, be discovered to have racist members, or the difference between a party that has racist members and loves it and a party which, when it discovers it has racist members, kicks them out. Now, these seem to me to be very, very crucial divides. And yet, all of the people that are lumped in as far right would encompass all of those things.
You rightly talk in the piece about how, to be more specific on the Front National, just how much they have changed in a whole set of policy areas and sort of philosophy too. I mean, they now, the Front National, like so many of these parties, do emerge from pretty murky waters. There's no question about that. Nobody's denying that for a moment. But they have emerged. They are now a party that supports laïcité. I mean, the whole anti-Semitic Catholic tradition, anti-Dreyfus tradition was not to embrace laïcité. They now embrace laïcité. They talk about culture rather than race. They talk about being opposed to Islamism rather than Muslims. I mean, they've modified not only their policies but their whole philosophy. And you've had a lot of people coming into the party from the more mainstream right parties, and that has had a modifying and civilising influence on them. And if we are not to respect and welcome that, and indeed, if for our own political purposes, we need to go on calling them fascists and far right. That is very unfortunate.
You risk the possibility in a country like Sweden, where people say, of course X, who I know who votes Sweden Democrat, or Y, who I know who'd like to stand for the party, isn't a fascist. And then when you call another person you don't know a fascist, I say particularly young people, I think, are suspicious of it, like the throwing around of the term racism or anti-Semitism in bad. And there's one answer to this, by the way. I mention this in my book, that there's an answer to this that's very obvious in the short term, which is that there should be a similar societal punishment, as it were, for using these terms knowingly erroneously, as there is for the crime itself. In other words, that if you go around calling people racist who are clearly not racist, you should be deemed to be as sort of ugly and dishonest in your politics as somebody who is a racist. If you go around saying that person is far right simply because it's convenient for you politically, instead of getting away scot-free from it and saying, well, it doesn't matter, and sort of brushing the facts away if they ever land, that person should themselves be seen to be equally destructive of the democratic process.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.